Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Employee Handbooks and Enforcing Policies. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kayla, and I will be your facilitator. This session is eligible for HRCI and SHRM credit. So, towards the end, I will try to remind you to click on your certificate so that you can get those credits. Now, if you have any issues with credits, please email us at webinars@paycor.com. All right, so now it is time to get started, and I would love to introduce our speakers for the hour. We've got Jocelyn King, who is the CEO and founder of Virgil HR, a SaaS solution that empowers HR professionals to make smart, compliant employment decisions in real time. Now, Virgil HR offers a unique value proposition by providing instant employment and labor law guidance via a smart chatbot, helping HR navigate the complex legal landscape. We also have John Baldino, and John is the founder of Humoriso, a company dedicated to helping businesses manage talent, address skill gaps, plan for succession, and foster a culture of enthusiastic buy-in. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it. My name is Jocelyn King. As Kayla mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Virgil HR. She gave a great overview of Virgil HR. A couple of things that I wanted to point out. The first is I used to be an HR professional my entire career, and I had a really difficult time tracking, complying with employment and labor laws, particularly at the state and local level, and was tired of going onto different databases and doing research. So we built a chatbot. It's actually a majority of it is not built by AI. It's actually programmed by labor and employment attorneys. AI just isn't accurate enough yet. And we can actually diagnose what laws apply to a specific employee in a specific circumstance and tell you everything you need to do to be compliant. We have other aspects of our product as well, like our employee handbook builder, multi-state comparison tool, legal updates, compliance calendar, and the ability to speak to someone on our legal team as well. And toward the very end, we will have a QR code if you're interested in learning a little bit more. And in the resources box that Kayla mentioned, you can also find a link to our marketplace profile and request a demo there too. But I'm really excited about John, my guest here today. I'd asked John to join because he makes me look good when I do these webinars. And he just has a phenomenal breadth of knowledge about the human resources professional as an HR professional himself. So really excited for you to be here, John, if you want to do a quick intro.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Appreciate the kindness. John Baldino, president of Humoriso. We are an HR consulting firm, and as was shared, we really are in the business of supporting organizations at whatever stage of growth they're in, from startup to enterprise level organizations, providing tactical and transformative approaches to HR, to talent acquisition, to HR technology. And so it's been a good ride in my career, and so I'm excited that I get to do what I do at Humoriso.
Great. So we'll touch on the agenda next. Kayla, are you going to be handling the slides, or do you want me to?
Yeah, feel free to click the next button here whenever you feel you're ready.
Okay, fantastic. So the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about what goes into making a handbook compliant, essential policies that you'll absolutely want to include in there, a couple items around really how your size of an organization or your industry or your location impacts your handbook and the content within it, how to keep your handbook up to date. That's a tricky one, so we'll talk about that, and best practices on handbook creation and distribution, when to involve an attorney, and tools for maintaining handbooks, one of which selfishly is Virgil HR. Lastly, what we want to do, kind of in the spirit of St. Valentine's Day and tough love, how do you handle discussions with employees when there's a policy violation or concern around a policy? So we'll get to that in just a bit. So what makes a handbook legally compliant? I think some of this is pretty straightforward, right? We want to make sure that these handbooks are aligned with federal, state, and local laws. Perfect example here, right, is are you an FMLA covered employer? If you are, FMLA language and the policy should absolutely be in your handbook. Kind of talking about employee rights and employer obligations as well. And then we can't forget the very tricky state-specific addenda. Really, it gets to be difficult because in addition to state, you also have to consider local policies as well. So we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about Virgil's tool. So John, talk to us a little bit about the essential policies we'd want to include in a handbook.
Yeah, thank you. The sort of the step back framework to this, though, is, obviously a handbook is necessary. I know for some of you, you're like, nah, I don't like it. It's too long. There's so many pages. Nobody reads it. It is a must for a couple of reasons. One, we just talked about compliance. You're required, right, to disclose some of these policies and truths for what the employment relationship should be like. So something like the equal employment opportunity statement right at the beginning. What does it mean to work here? Yes, there is something compliant about the EEO commitment that we have from a federal perspective, but there's good language in that, right? That there's opportunity for all. That should be something that we're excited to kind of affirm in a handbook that we put together. Of course, your insurance companies, from a liability perspective, need to know that there's anti-harassment, non-discrimination policies. Those things have to be in there. Again, yes, it covers you, should there be an issue, but on the other side of it, it should be proactively affirmational, right? Being a part of our organization means you have a right to not be treated in a particular way, and we believe in that, and this is the way that we believe in it. Don't let people guess about how they can take time off. I mean, if there's a top 10 list, maybe even a top 5 list of what we're asked for in human resources when somebody starts with an organization, when do I get days off? How do I accrue days? When am I allowed to start taking them? What are the holidays, right? Whatever the time off related policies or calendars should be, they should be clearly in your handbook so that someone can reference it whenever they want to. It shouldn't be that HR has to be constantly answering emails and questions about the same things. Let's have it all in one place. Anything that is around expectation of behavior, conduct, what's too much, right? That's really important as well. And so workplace conduct, disciplinary policies, disciplinary procedure in general should be in there. What could the expectation be? It doesn't mean that if someone comes in and assaults someone, we give them a verbal warning first. That's not what it means. But you want to have something clearly stated to say, here's typically what it is. And obviously it doesn't mean that we can't make exceptions to this. At-will employment is something that I would believe everybody listening today is familiar with. And this at will is really the construct of most employment relationships. I know it's different, nuanced for unions a little bit or some government work. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail for our time here. But in general, it's at will on both sides. That means if you're needing to move on from an employee, as long as it's not violating their rights in some way, you'll be able to easily do that. Just like an employee can decide this is no longer the job for me and move on in the same way and not have to give you a 2-week notice, to be honest. And so these kinds of policies are really important to have there. I do want to mention something that's been in the news, I think, over the last year about non-competes and non-solicitations and this and that. Those things have been tabled, but I'll say generally, put in your handbook things that are clear about confidentiality. What are you allowed to talk about? What aren't you? And what can you take with you if you leave here? What can't you? Same thing with solicitation. Are you allowed to run after our client list the day after you leave? Are you allowed to work in another job for your side hustle that in some way competes with your day job? Those conflict of interest considerations. All of that should be looked at and included in your handbook so that everyone can really, right from the get-go, know what the expectation is and how far is too far. And then have them sign off on it, at least sign off on the receipt of the handbook. We can't force people to read. I'd like to, but you can't force people to read, at least acknowledging that they are in receipt of it, either physical signature or electronic if you are putting it through an HRIS system.
Yeah, John, and I think that's an important thing to note. A lot of employees think that when they are signing the acknowledgement form that they are agreeing with everything in the handbook. Not the case, of course. This is just an acknowledgement that you've received it. Yeah. Okay, great. So size, industry, and location. I'm sure we have people from all across the country, different sized organizations, different industries. And so I'm already seeing some questions come through in the Q&A about specific things that are relevant to certain employers. So yes, all of this stuff matters, right? Like, perfect example, the ADA applies to employers that have 15 plus employees, or there may be some safety related, like OSHA, for example, policies that need to be included in your handbook if you are a construction employer. Location is always going to matter because we have specific state laws or local laws that need to be taken into consideration as well. So yes, all of this matters. And staying up to date, I think this is pretty obvious why we need to stay up to date. These laws are changing all the time. I think there were 300 or 400 last year that passed, John, something like that, at a federal, state, and local level. And so what happens is your handbook becomes outdated very quickly. And so there's this best practice of, refresh your handbook once a year. What I feel very passionate about is I think once a year isn't frequent enough. So we have technology like Virgil, for example, that will actually create that policy template. That policy template for you, and auto push it into your handbook real time, so you always have this up-to-date handbook.
Yeah, and if I just jump in on that one too, I would say the pace at which, I'm someone of a longevity in human resources, and it used to be pretty cleanly January 1st is where changes were enacted, and if that change was enacted, we updated the handbook at the new year. That was pretty clean to do. That's not the case anymore. You have laws that are being passed not only at the federal level, but also at the local and state level that are activated, March 13th, July 10th, random dates. And so your handbook really has to stay very, very alive and change with that timeline. And I would not underestimate local rule and employment consideration. That is probably the fastest growing area of employment consideration, right? Sometimes we're surprised to know that a particular jurisdiction has a certain rule in place around something. Make sure you do your homework, not just federal and state, but also where you're hiring folks, especially those of you that are doing distributed workforces and have people all over the place in the country. You really want to take a look at what's required in those places and keep up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think, segues really nicely into best practices around handbook creation. And I'll pass this off to you, John, since you have a tremendous amount of experience in this area. But, in addition to what you said about really this being a live document that you are constantly updating, what other best practices would you recommend?
Yeah, and I love, one of the things, and I know everybody can see what we have here on the slide. The state addendums are always an interesting one, right? Because we may unintentionally confuse employees where you've got information that reads one way from a federal level, but then you have an addendum that addresses something in the state in another area that is different than what the federal policy is. Really make sure that your employees have clarity. It is super important for them to understand, well, wait a minute, I thought I could do this, but then I read over here, it's something else. Which one wins, right? And sometimes when we're in human resources or even in the law, right, we forget that our audience doesn't operate in these areas of consideration on a daily basis the way that we do. So read it with fresh eyes. ask some people as you have a handbook put together, when you read this policy, what do you understand? What does it tell you? You might be surprised at the difference that someone else sees it in who's not in this work every day. So I definitely would recommend that so that you could focus on clarity. And I am a huge, huge, huge proponent of accessibility. No one wants, a 100-page binder to go home with on their first day. Digital versions, accessible whenever I want to read something. The table of contents is searchable. I can click on a particular topic area and it takes me to it. Whatever you can do to make it your handbook accessible and easy to use, I think your employee appreciates it and feels like it's thoughtful for them. I don't want to read 30 pages before I figure out what section I have to go to. Where can I go quickly to kind of see these things? The other thing when it comes to handbook creation, I'll mention quickly, Jocelyn, before I turn it back to you, is that it should still feel like your company. It should still feel like your company. I love that, you'll have your logo all over the place, or a note from the CEO or the CHRO, or whomever you think a word or two to kind of set the tone for the handbook should be. I think it's smart to include that. I think it's smart also to maybe put things in about the mission and vision of the organization. Again, at the onset, that helps to set a tone for how everything else should be read, and make it relevant, right? If you write a statement that doesn't sound like anybody that works in that building, then it's not setting the right tone. Really make it as authentic as you can.
And to piggyback on that a little bit, when we talk about tone, it goes beyond tone of that welcome message. It's the tone of voice in all of our policies as well.
Yeah.
Is this going to be this formal policy written by a lawyer? Is it going to be written in a more colloquial fashion where it could be more relatable to that day-to-day employee? But does it, at the end of the day, identify with your company culture, identify with your company leadership, so that on day one, when somebody's starting with your organization, they have a really good feel for not just what their rules are, but what your company culture is really all about.
Yeah, 100%. And read it as if you're reading it for the first time, because that'll help you to see, does this really say, to your point, say that? And does it read too cold? If you have sections in your handbook that say, if you have an issue, please go and see a representative from our human resources department. But and people are reading it thinking, we have an HR department? then that line doesn't make sense to them. Who is my HR department? We don't even know that. So just because it might work in terms of making sense in the paragraph, update it. If you have an issue, please go and see Mary, who operates in our as our HR representative, or Joe, who operates as our X, Y, and Z. Be specific. And if your problem is with one of those two people, please see the CEO for that. Give people all of those that they need to know about the people involved, and don't just assume that they know who is in the human resources department.
Really quickly, John, accessibility.
Yeah.
What about employees that don't have easy access to a computer? What do you recommend people do?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think a couple of things. One, I'm anti-paper, but sometimes you need to have a physical copy, right? For folks that just might need to stop in and read something. Another thing is you could have employee accessible laptops or kiosk in your physical location. If you have something like that where someone can come on a break, or to go and check something in the policy on a computer or an iPad, something like that, that has these documents on it. I think that's probably something that we should be thoughtful of. The other thing I want to mention with accessibility too is being thoughtful of those who might need an additional way to access the document. Do we have visually impaired employees, for instance, and want to be thoughtful from an ADA standpoint, do we have the opportunity for the handbook to be kind of translated into an audio file, right? Run it through a system, and then someone could listen to it if they needed to. Be thoughtful about all walks of people that might be involved when you think accessibility. Most people, though, if they do have a smartphone, then even if they don't have an intranet or an email address that belongs to the organization, which happens in a lot of companies, right? They're not given an email address and such. Make sure that either the app of the system you might be using or the web address is easy for the employee to use if they did need to use their smartphone to access things. www.blah, blah, 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 blah.com / blah, blah, dash, blah, 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 blah. Already you're hearing me, and it's too much for someone to try to type in their phone. Be thoughtful about, a shortened bit.ly or some sort of short URL to be able to use for those individuals.
Yeah, I actually, somebody actually put in the Q&A, and I'm just going to bring it up now because it's really relevant. They have an employee population with limited reading comprehension. Yeah. And so I think the audio file, for example, is a perfect way of accommodating that. But there's also software out there where you can just import your policies into this software, and it will tell you what reading level, what grade it is actually written in. So you can use that, because you know what? There have been lawsuits where employers have written this very special handbook that was written by lawyers and doesn't really resonate with anybody. But they had, it's this exact example. They actually had employees that had limited reading comprehension, or actually I think maybe limited vocabulary. It just wasn't a well-educated community, unfortunately. And those employees were held accountable to policies that the court said, hey, actually you can't hold them accountable to it because you didn't write it in a way that was going to be understandable to your workforce.
I love that. That's a great example. And I think one of the things sometimes in our HR discipline that some practitioners try to do is orientation, right? Getting together with employees, especially at the onset, and go through the handbook. I think when you think about best practices for your handbook, think about being on the receiving end of someone reading through 58 pages of policy, if that's what you're doing in your orientation. There's a good chance that they're going to start tuning out. Instead, and I know that I've seen some questions as well, I think it's possible to do something like a top 10, right, in your orientation, to just hit some of the things that you know are going to be most asked about in that employment experience. But then maybe also create some videos. Do a 3-minute video on these 2 policies that are in the handbook, just so that people know. Giving it so that there's easy access for those that could either watch it on an intranet type platform. I know there's some companies that have closed Instagram groups or closed Facebook groups for employees only, and those lists, those connections are monitored to make sure that they're still active employees, and they're reading that kind of information instead by video, and that helps with the reading level consideration as well.
Yeah, for sure. Also, one more thing to add. I worked for a company where there were several collective bargaining agreements that we were kind of dealing with, and anyway, it was a very, very complicated handbook. And what one of the attorneys had recommended was, hey, take the most important policies that you want people to read, because this handbook is 100 pages long, and summarize it up at the top. So that at the very least, they're getting that information. So if you do have a really long handbook or it's just complicated, that might be a recommendation that would be suitable for your organization.
Yeah, listen, if it's complicated for you, there's a great chance it's going to be complicated for an employee.
Real quick too, that's a very good point. We had a question from Laura, and I just wanted to intervene here really quick, just because we were on the topic. Which app were you referring to for plugging in your handbook for review? Was there an app for that?
There isn't a specific app that I have in mind. I just know that they exist. Sorry. I personally have never used it before. I haven't had to, but John, maybe you know of an app.
Well, I know that in the Microsoft suite of product, right? If you bring that into a Word doc, there is a review of it, and I don't remember where it is in terms of how you can get to it, but I even know there it will give you an idea about what the grade level is of that material.
Mm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sure.
To whoever sent that message, if you would like to email me at the very end, my email address will be at the end of this deck. I'm happy to look into it and send that over to you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so when do you involve a lawyer?
Never.
Look, best
No, I'm
practice
just kidding.
is every part of the hand. John. Yeah, I mean, but this is what I'd say, right? Like the deck says, yeah, initial creation all the way to when you're making changes and adding to your handbook. I would say actually deviate from this a little bit and just say, I think, as an HR practitioner, you are capable of creating a handbook yourself. It can be hard if you don't have a template to work off of. That's why tools like our employee handbook builder, others out there, where we have hundreds and hundreds of policy templates for you to incorporate into the builder, and then you can just make edits that are suitable to your organization, is a really great place to start. But if you do have a tool like that, building it all out yourself and then saving that money of having to go to the lawyer every step of the way is great, because once you're done, you can just have an attorney review it, give their stamp of approval, and then send it out. You might want to do a once-a-year review with them, but that would only be for any type of laws that have changed. And again, there are tools like ours out there that help you with that as well, just to kind of minimize on your legal spend. But if you don't have a handbook builder or anything to work off of, going to an attorney and getting that template to start is a really great way of beginning that process. John, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there you go. I agree, and I think that doing it in a way that is workable for the team. One of the things that I know that's true for organizations is the breadth of geography, and that may at times mean a distributed human resources team as well. So I would just make sure you're using a tool or a product that is accessible for all, and then gives you the opportunity to sort of collaborate together as well as you look at these policies. It is important for that team to be able to have clarity when they're putting this together, and in consideration of an attorney, to first be able to look at the jurisdictions where employment is happening. And for those individuals to get together to say, hey, we've got staff that are in San Francisco and California. What does that look like differently for those that are in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where we have other workers happening? What should we at first be thoughtful of before we go and run and grab a lawyer? Let us use the tool that we have and at least start with a punch list of what we initially observe. I think it enables there to be some collaboration. And so should you need to involve an attorney, everyone has already had the opportunity to talk through some of these things and have very specific questions for application. I just think is a great opportunity to sort of build the team together as well.
Yeah, and there are some policies that you really don't need an attorney to review, like, for example, a bring your dog to work policy or something like that, unless it's, an ADA related thing. But there are other high risk areas that you'll want to consider them looking at. Our policies are all written by attorneys, employment and labor law attorneys, but I would still encourage you, have your attorney take a look at it, in-house or out of house, especially those high-risk areas, just to make sure that your specific processes are in line with the law.
And it is a great point. It is important to think about your attorney, if you have one already representing and or on retainer for your organization. Ultimately, and God forbid, should there be an action filed against the organization, that's the attorney that's going to refer to the handbook that's been put together and defend the organization, right, as a result of. So it would be at the very least good for that attorney, the relationship that you have, to review what it is that you've primarily put together. At best, you're going to cut down on the amount of hours that the attorney has to be involved with things, right? So your costs should be cut considerably. But that person ultimately, in a retained relationship, is going to be the one that's defending you should there be an action. So that person's eyes being on it, or that firm's eyes being on it, is probably safest for you to do.
Yep, that's a great point. Okay, tools to maintain handbooks. I know there's some questions that came through early on about how do you keep up with all of these laws. There are software providers like Virgil, for example, that do offer handbook builder products. These handbook builders are going to have hundreds and hundreds of policy templates, the ability for you to make edits, build out your handbook. Some builders are better than others, so you'll want to take a look and see what works best for your organization. Some of them will keep up with laws like Virgil. So as the laws are changing, we're pushing those new policies in so that you can send them off to your employees. Legal research tools. I don't see this come up as often for that day-to-day HR professional, but they are available. Westlaw and LexisNexis, they're expensive. But if you have, for example, an in-house legal team that's using these tools already, perhaps you can get a license from them, which would be great. So the other piece here that you'd want to consider are state and federal labor department websites. We actually use that. So in addition to other tools out there to help us stay up to date with these laws, our legal team is following these different labor department websites. They're even calling these offices when they need kind of some clarification on a new law that's passed. That might be something helpful for you. I remember Massachusetts was the first state that passed a salary history ban, maybe 10 years ago or so, something like that. And I, at the time, was much newer to HR and was unclear as to whether or not we had to be doing business in Massachusetts for it to apply, or if that candidate in the application process needed to be in Massachusetts. So I called him. The guy who wrote the piece of legislation picked up the phone, and he explained to me, no, it's for any candidate in Massachusetts. It's there to protect them. So that was really interesting when that happened. We just changed our entire policy to not ask about any salary history because it was hard to tell where these candidates were. So calling them was really helpful. And then obviously a document management platform, Google Workspace or SharePoint, that's great because there's version control in there. You can see what people were previously working on, have kind of approvals in there, et cetera. So another great way of building out a handbook too.
Yeah, and the obviously the software avenue is the way to go. Just from a storage standpoint, right, and an accessibility standpoint, you've got lots there that you can keep track of in the easiest way possible, even though it's complex information. I would say there are the Department of Labor, both at the federal and the state level, do offer some times of explanation. There's FAQs that go along with some of the policies that they have put forward as well. So always make sure, just to Jocelyn's point, that you are checking with those sites as well and read the opinions and the FAQs connected to anything that's been passed. Sometimes they will even give you examples. Let's say this and this go on. What do I do? They'll actually even do some of that. So that's a great tool to use if you want to kind of get into the weeds a little bit more of I don't quite understand this 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next is tough love. Before we continue, I should have prefaced this earlier on. John and I are not lawyers. We don't pretend to be lawyers. We're not providing legal advice at all. So if you are going to make any decisions on anything we've said, please speak to an attorney first. I had asked that if anybody had a hypothetical on a difficult conversation at work with regard to a policy violation or simply a concern about a new policy that you've introduced, go ahead and send that in the Q&A section, and we'll be happy to cover that as we have time. But there are a few things here that are really important. These conversations can sometimes be difficult, especially when you're dealing with harassment or discrimination or theft, or just inappropriate behavior in the workplace. But it's important that as you sit down with each of these employees, you're setting clear expectations from the very beginning, and you're ensuring that they, kind of like a seek to understand conversation, you're ensuring that they understand the expectations that your organization has of them as an employee. Listening to their perspective is key. So, let's say, for example, you have an employee who is clocking in on time but is disappearing for extended coffee breaks. So her manager maybe notices that she's missing from her desk during peak hours and goes to HR. It's totally fine to say, hey, we've noticed that this is happening, but is there anything preventing you from following the schedule? Because you know what, there could be a health issue that we don't know about at all. And that's the reason why she keeps going to use the restroom. So she might need an accommodation if that's the case. And the manager would need to be appropriately educated in some way, so that they're adhering to that accommodation. So hearing their perspective is really key, and providing any type of specific feedback or examples. So let's say you have an employee who's been accused of harassing another coworker in the office, right? Come prepared with examples on how that person has done that, because that's the most effective way of being able to set those expectations for them and providing very specific feedback. So if you look back on, hey, you were harassing this person because you continued to bully her about the clothes that she was wearing. She's always wearing pink and you're bullying her for wearing pink all the time, as a dumb example. Make sure that there's a specific feedback on what they should be doing differently or could be doing differently to address whatever scenario has come up. Documentation, of course, as everybody knows, is really key. So ensuring that you are documenting appropriately, that there's a seek to understand, that they acknowledge the conversation at the very least, even if they don't agree with it, is key. And then everybody needs to get it, and it should be in your policies and in your handbook anyway, but there are consequences for noncompliance, and you need to remember that standardization is key, because you can't set precedent and then not follow it in the future. So keep that in mind. But John, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a great example. This slide is a great example of where the consultative nature, even of what Humoriso does, right? That we're in these conversations with you about those specific examples that you brought up. You can absolutely have policy in place surrounding some of these considerations, but how do we then disseminate, discuss, and deal with the policy in action? That's where I think the conversations are so important. Because it is a lot about expectation management and perspective in some of those areas. And so, saying, well, you're late, this is the third time you're late and you're fired. And meanwhile, Jim in the cubicle next to this person is late all the time, and everybody knows Jim's late. Well, why is the lateness for this person now the reason to say goodbye? Is it really just we don't like that person? Well, we've got to be thoughtful about how we're trying to use policy and weaponize it when we're not willing to be consistent in using it in other similar circumstances. That's where I think some of this conversation is going to be really important, because at some point it does need to become non-negotiable, right? At some point we can only talk about this so many times. We're going to start documenting, and documenting can be an email. I'm a big fan of, after having a crucial conversation with somebody around a particular issue, to say, when you get back to your desk or later this afternoon, when you get back to the office or in front of a computer, would you email me what you understand from our conversation today? Let them put it in their own words back to you, so you really can see, one, yes, I've got something I'm going to put on file from a documentation standpoint, but two, did we communicate effectively? There are times where someone will email me what they think they understand, and I'm thinking, oh no, that is not exactly what we talked about. So it's important for me to go back to say, thank you for sending that to me. That was really helpful. And what it showed me was I wasn't very clear in the policy piece that we were talking about, or the rollout of that policy. Now we can find a place where we can try to come back together. And I think it's important to keep that communication open and fluid.
Yeah, that's a really clever way of getting documentation, but also seeking to understand and ensuring that they took away what you wanted out of that conversation. So very cool. I have seen a lot of hypotheticals and non-hypotheticals coming through. Kayla, do you want to read them, or do you want me to run through them?
Oh, well, I'll go ahead. If you have something that's sticking out to you, Jocelyn, feel free to start there. But we've got so many questions and so many scenarios, so I'll let you start, and then I'll come back in a bit.
Sure. So one question here, what are your thoughts on who should be included in disciplinary action conversations? Do you recommend that HR be involved in those conversations, or should it just be their direct manager? I understand that it might be situational based upon the reasonings, concerns of the individual's reaction, etc. However, what do you recommend from a general standpoint? I have worked for companies that have had different views. The one company said that they didn't want HR involved because it limited who the employee could go to with concerns. That's very interesting. John, you and I might have opposing views. I have no clue what you think about this, but for me, I think HR should be involved in those disciplinary discussions because there's a legal issue at play. And we want to make sure that those conversations are being handled appropriately, the right messaging is there, the right documentation is there, and there's a witness too. So you always do want to have a witness in there, whether it's another person on your HR team, or if it is the manager. But I think actually HR should own that process.
I don't disagree with you. And I would say to you, even more so, and I want to see all the hearts come for this one. Honestly, for the protection of the manager who's involved, it's good for HR to be in the room. There are times where some of us have probably experienced a manager starting to say something to an employee that's not such a great idea to say to the employee. And for HR to be in the room to say, oh, yes, okay, so what we want to talk about is get right back to what we want to address rather than letting it be distracted by some other things. I'm sure we've been in those situations where it was good that we're in the room. So I am a fan of HR and the manager. Now, I will say I'm great to have the manager take lead on that because that is a working relationship, but HR should be in the room, even if to take notes on what's being discussed. And so therefore, at the end, could sort of confirm what's been discussed. I think it's a smart thing to do.
Absolutely. The next is, how do you approach an employee about their grooming? This has always been hard to discuss with employees, especially the younger generations. This is, we talk about tough love. This is a really tough conversation to have. I've had to do it, John. I'm sure you have as well, but do you want to start off with this one?
Many times. And this is the thing, when you talk about handbook policy, you can, it's hard to sit with someone and say, hey, we have a policy about hygiene. I don't know if you've read that yet. You're basically telling the person that there's an issue with hygiene, right? So I think it's better, instead of starting with just pointing to the policy, to say, I know this is going to be a difficult conversation, and I'm just going to ask for 5 minutes because I don't want to belabor it with you. But I do want you to know that I have gotten a couple of complaints about odor in the area. It's hygienic in nature. And I just want you to know, I don't need to be involved with what your grooming habits are or this or that. I at least want to say today, it's come up a couple of times. I'm going to ask you to be thoughtful about whatever you're doing for your hygiene practices, and maybe step it up a bit or two. And let's see if that makes a difference. And I will let you know if I don't hear from anybody anymore. I will let you know that. But I don't need you to tell me what you're doing for showering and brushing your teeth and washing. I don't have to make you justify because you're an adult. At the very least, I just want you to be aware. And if we circle back on this in round 2 because it's still an issue, then we can be more specific. But for now, I hope that is helpful. I think if you just kind of, boom, just address it, be simple, but be respectful of the person you're talking to, usually works well.
Awesome. Okay, so we have one from Shakita. What if our handbook, and this is a doozy, so I'm just going to give you a heads up here. What if our handbook clearly states work from home is an incentive for management? However, when an hourly employee gives a resignation notice, they are offered to work from home as an incentive to stay. Now, other employees ask for this incentive and it's denied. What does or can the hourly employees do in this situation? Told you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a horrible policy.
That's a horrible policy.
Horrible
Horrible.
policy. Remove that policy, please, from the handbook. Because there's absolutely no consistency whatsoever.
Right.
And now you've set precedents by giving a different employee kind of type this same benefit, and you're denying others from it as well. In my opinion, that can actually open you up to some liability because because if there are folks that, maybe think to themselves, well, you're only letting women work from home and not men, and I have 2 kids and I should be home too, so all this stuff can cause some issues from a liability perspective, so I'd be very careful about that. And you probably just want to revisit this policy. If you have a work from home policy, what are the requirements somebody must meet? It's a little tough when you're just using it for retention issues, because then you kind of want to give it to anybody who's about to leave. So at that point, you need to think, is this something that I'm going to offer to all hourly employees? Or is this something that we're putting our foot down and we're just not going to retain them if that's the requirement they have? You kind of have to decide. It's either a policy or it's not.
Right. And I'm going to be real quick because I want to get to other questions. Consistency is the right word, Jocelyn. Absolutely. It's inconsistently applied. The other thing is to call work from home an incentive means working on site at the organization is not an incentive. That's a ridiculous message to send to your organization. There are people that will never be able to work from home due to the type of work that they do. If someone's in shipping or receiving, if someone is customer facing on site at a brick and mortar property, they will never be able to have that incentive. And so now they are punished for the role that they've taken. That's a ridiculous message to send.
Yeah, it's engagement issues, retention issues, liability issues. So please take that away to the powers that be at your organization and see if you can fix that.
Nice. Thank you for that. All right. So we have another one from Karen. So what happens when you have someone who doesn't fit the policy quite perfectly, but it's the right thing to do? So it's not a legal one, but just a company policy, like bereavement. We exclude grandparents and have had people ask about why we can't include them. I was told it was a slippery slope. People are close to people who may not even be in their family. How can we get leadership on board to rethink policies and maybe take out too nuanced thresholds? Or am I completely off base?
Yeah, I mean, my very first job, I worked for a company that said, if your brother dies, you are entitled to 2 days. And if it's your mom, you're entitled to 5. And that is so insulting, right? It's really, really insulting to the employee. So, I think that if it sounds like you are supportive of opening up the bereavement policy to making it, either more inclusive, people who perhaps you're not related to. It could be your mom's best friend who raised you your whole life. There are a lot of different folks in your life that are important to you, and nobody can tell you how you should be grieving. So to say that you can take time off for your mom, but you can't take time off for your grandma, I think is not right. It's not the right thing to do. And so I would encourage you to just speak to your leadership team about thinking about this from a more compassionate perspective, and really asking yourself, okay, well, if somebody, first of all, how often are people dying, right? I mean, this isn't happening all the time or something. As an employer, you want to be supporting your employee through a really difficult time and showing them that they're valued and that you care for them. And if that's part of your culture, then your policies need to reflect your culture too.
If you have an employee if the fear is people are going to take off all the time, if you have an employee who has multiple deaths like that in a year and they're taking extra bereavement time, please don't think that it's a good time for them. That's what we forget. It's not like they're taking a carnival cruise somewhere. They're dealing with the loss of a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, family members that mean something, and they have 3 in a year. Is there a quota for death? Should we sort of schedule these things? I mean, it would be a difficult time for that person, and I think the perspective has to be about, to Jocelyn's point, the employee. I too am from a background where we had early days, right? Had to give a number of days per level of family member. I think even state law has jumped in on some things as well about what is family because of this as well. So I would also encourage, you might have to check to see if there's some language that might overlap into anything that has to do with sickness or bereavement.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is from Laura. Do you have any advice about handbook items for seasonal employees? Does there need to be a specific section in the handbook for that?
Yes. Ish. Is that what you're going to say, Jocelyn?
I was just going to say that maybe not separate, but just a little statement. This does not apply to seasonal employees, or this does apply to seasonal employees, something like that, especially in the benefits section.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm sorry, not to cut you off. That's exactly right. There's an area where you can define the employment relationship: full-time employee, part-time employee, seasonal employee. And right from the onset, they'll be able to know which policies apply to all or only to a particular group or two in there. And that may exclude seasonal because of, to Jocelyn's point, something like benefits as an example.
Okay, thank you. We did have this question a little bit earlier in the presentation. This is from Colleen. Do we need a handbook for each office if we're a multi-state company?
Okay, so this is kind of first of all, it depends on what industry you're in, right? It does depend. If you are in some type of like logistics or retail or manufacturing or construction or something like that, and these sites just operate differently, then yes, you want to have some separate handbooks that are specific to those sites. However, if you are just an employer that happens to have offices in a few different states, or you have an office in Maryland, but you have employees in 15 other states, I don't think you need a separate handbook for something like that. You can have your standard handbook. And then a lot of people ask this question: should I put the state addenda with the main handbook, or should I do it separately? I'm of the mind that you should have state handbooks separate to the regular handbook and just offer both to each employee, because I know this might sound a little silly, but it's come up. If you have an employee in Texas, seeing that California employees have 5 sick days, they might think that that's pretty unfair. So separating those has always been a practice of mine when it's practical for the organization, but it just depends on what type of company you have.
Yes. I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I probably lean more towards separate handbooks for jurisdictions, for locations. And this is especially true for work from home as well. And I think the ease of using an HRIS of an upload from a document management component, from an onboarding standpoint, you can tie that specific handbook, state-specific handbook, to someone who's coded as a work from home in California or work from home in Illinois. And that onboarding checklist is automatic with that specific handbook, so that there's no confusion between, I thought I got 5 sick days, and no, that's California, you're in Texas. It removes that confusion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We have another question here from Matthew. When there are major law changes and laws that could change your handbook, would you resend the handbook to all employees and require them to re-sign the handbook?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to say yes. I know Jocelyn's going to say differently, but I'll be quick. I would say yes, because excuse me, sometimes we, in some of the law changes, it actually does prescribe in it to say that it has to be redistributed to staff. So make sure that you read the whole law, not just what the law is about, but it may actually give you instruction in this, so you may have to do it. And if it's going to change something that has to do with the way in which the employment relationship engages, then I would say yes to get it out right away and have it signed off, the acknowledgement of it as soon as you can. Go ahead, Jocelyn. Go ahead. Counterpoint.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I do think you need acknowledgement, but I don't think you need it every single time you send out a policy, unless, as John said, it's specifically required. But the thing is, you're giving them the policy anyway, so all you're doing is getting an acknowledgement. So even then, I think you don't need to get an acknowledgement every time. My kind of best practice is once a month, I will just send out any updated policies and ask for a signature that they've acknowledged they've received it. If it is less frequent for you because you're only in 2 states and there aren't a lot of changes happening at the federal level, maybe you even do it, ad hoc. That can probably be done as just a one-off because it's not going to happen very often. Just depends on the volume. But I think a monthly cadence is perfectly reasonable.
And there are some policies, I'll say this quickly too, there are some policies that you can include in the handbook, but that actually the law says need to be given to them separately as well. This is especially true on the local and state level. So you can include it in the handbook, but also has to be signed off on separately. And just because you hang it in your break room doesn't mean that it meets the full bones of the law. You may still need an individual sign off as well. So again, reading and being directed correctly with those policy changes is important.
Absolutely. Okay. Another question here, and this is, I believe, what's on a lot of people's minds here. This is from Chloe. With recent events going on with ICE officers threatening going into workplaces, how can we create a policy or create a company handbook that can help prepare employees for these incidents that may come up?
I actually don't know if that's a handbook thing. Yeah. I would say it's actually probably more of an all hands, some internal communication campaign, and then consistently pushing the message to your employees through those internal communication campaigns. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, okay. I don't think you want to have an ICE policy in your handbook, right, for what to do. Probably it's not necessary to do so.
Got it. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's see. Someone asked earlier, how long is too long for the handbook? What does long mean to you?
Golden question.
I love that.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so I think once, everybody's going to have a different opinion on what long means. My personal opinion, I think once you start going over 60 pages, that's pretty long. Nobody's going to read it. But sometimes it's necessary. Again, that's why I say split general handbook from the state handbooks, because then employees are only going to be reading what's relevant to them.
I think the one thing to always remember about the handbook, and I try to remind people of this as much as possible, it is a reference book. It's not a novel. So the thought that someone is going to sit and read cover to cover as if it's the story of something, it's not likely how it'll be read, and it certainly isn't how it's intended. That's why a table of contents is so important. It should be treated as a reference guide. When I want to know something about X, boom, I know where to go to read about that thing. Certainly someone can read it cover to cover. That's why the length of it doesn't always have to matter as much because of the reference guide component to it. I just would make sure that you're, especially if it's pertinent to the work you're doing, as technologically astute as you can be, so it's accessible and searchable as easy as possible for an employee.
Yeah, that's a great point, John.
All right. Well, we are at time, but I just want to say, Jocelyn, John, like you're a wonderful tag team. You've gone through so much information with us in such a short amount of time. So we do appreciate everything you've taught us today. I thought it was super valuable. I'm not even in HR. No, this is super valuable information. You've been amazing. Okay, and thank you to all of you. If you've been on from the very beginning, you should be able to click on your certificate for your credits. Again, if you have any issues with that, please email us at webinars@paycor.com. That's it. Thank you so much. Please get some more information here. We've got some QR codes up now. We'll leave that up until the end. But thank you all for attending. We'll see you all at the next webinar, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.